really nice to be here with you guys. It's you guys. Thank you in person for all your support and
Alabama, the Rocket City, and your awesome exclusive that you did with the turtles at the Saturn V. That was super cool.
no, that was fun. That was piece of history, not only the Saturn V, but the Space Camp.
Oh, absolutely. They used to give away career. You have an amazing career. The experiences you have gone through, like holy. Such a passion. Most of your passion, it seems, goes into comics throughout.
Books, Susan. The ultimate, the from reading on this as Comics Code approved, which means they were sort of regulated, quote unquote, self-regulated by this board that kept comics where they felt they were needed to be targeted, which is 12 years old and younger. So a lot of comics were kept for that much younger audience. So they oh, look at that, Master Splinter's coming in the house. Nice job, guys. Awesome. Cowabunga, dude. I always liked Cowabunga.
Oh, Raphael's back there too. I almost didn't recognize him because he's got a hat.
Raphael's great costume, guys. That's fantastic.
Awesome.
Good job.
What's in that pizza box?
Yeah, baby. I saw it on the outside. And the pizza box is like the baby turtles with the pizza.
Oh wow, that's super cool.
That's so great. It's like from the early movie. Pizza.
Pizza. Oh, Caesar steals that.
That I really, gravitated to Frank Miller's storytelling, and then of course he went from Daredevil to Ronin, which is a great, very inspirational original concept, and then Batman, of course.
I love that you can see the Ronin inspiration, like totally, because Ronin was one of those ones. Everybody talks about Frank Miller. I'm a big fan too, but I'm like Ronin. There's something about it that's unlike anything else he's done to me that just really stands out.
Well, yeah, no, thanks. It was because it was inspired, and I don't want to mispronounce the original. It was two Japanese manga artists. I said I could never pronounce the name appropriately, but they did a manga version of it's called Lone Wolf and Cub, which is a very, very famous Japanese comic series, which is done. And Miller had seen it, and his influences for Ronin was taken from that series. Of course, he Americanized it, did his own look, but he just really gravitated to it and exposed all of us to that, which is introduced a lot of us, up and coming guys to the whole world of manga, and much like Heavy Metal magazine did published a lot of European comics that was written more for adults, which is
yeah. So we all know the story of the Turtles, and you and Peter self-published this book. It winds up becoming a hit.
Mm-hmm.
Toys, TV show, movies, generational, like legacy behind this whole thing. What I want to get to this real quick, because what's amazing to me is that I feel like throughout your career, you've always done what you like. I feel like you thought maybe that you had gotten lucky. And I don't think that's the case. You and Peter are incredibly talented, and what y'all put together in that package, that's a whole package right there. But especially with like the Tundra stuff, you were always trying to do what you could to move this industry forward as far as creator rights go. So I just want to know if you want to touch on like creator rights and how much that means to you. I feel like that's been a big part of your career, and as a fan of this industry, I want to thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the kind words, and I appreciate it. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And again, it's having great fans in the first place allowed me to do things like Tundra. But to put it in perspective, clearly, Peter and I firmly stand on the shoulders of giants, and guys like Jack Kirby and Gene Colan, and so many different artists that inspired us when we were kids. Those comics that we were buying off of Spinner Art. Those are done by a whole cast of writers and artists that worked in an industry that was called work for hire. So whatever they created was owned by the company they worked for. So, Jack Kirby, Stan Lee, for a long time took all the credit for all things Marvel. And once reality settled in, no disrespect to Stan Lee, he was a great innovator and a genius for what he was. But a lot of the guys that really created stuff that was not given appropriate credit to, like Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko and all those guys. The companies they worked for, so they made a simple page rate, they got no royalties, and if those any of those concepts became, movies or TV shows or toy lines or those kind of things back in the day, the artists benefited not at all. They didn't have pension funds. They didn't have they were just sort of thank you for your ideas and left aside. And so we were very aware of this around the time that we were coming into the business. Like Jack Kirby was having a big legal discussion, for lack of a better term, with Marvel to get rights or get acknowledgement to his creations and contributions to those characters, as well as some money for Marvel's making millions and millions and millions, and he's not. And so we were aware of this, and so we felt we were very lucky that with the Turtles, one, that we self-published it through crowdfunding. We borrowed $1,200 from an uncle, and that's how we were able to publish that first issue. And then you guys bought it, and then it started this groundswell and became a success. And I felt appropriate that, respectfully to the guys that inspired us initially, and a lot of people coming into the business, that if I could start a company that would protect creators' rights, that so and I did as much as I could for the time that Tundra was a company. The people that published with me, I would do a contract with them for publishing rights only. All the publishing rights remain with the creators. They got a royalty, they got a profit share, everything like that. And that was a foundation where, and I wasn't the only one. Frank Miller was the real champion for creators' rights. Alan Moore, the same thing. And so a lot of people were respectfully acknowledging the ones that inspired them, and they inspired us, and we sort of wanted to pay it back as best we could. So, and it's great that the industry has changed. I mean, even as recent as as an example, Bob Kane used to take all the credit for creating all things Batman. And there was a guy named Bill Finger who is widely known that actually did most of the work, created most of the characters like Robin and the Joker and all those things. And so just finally seeing these creators that have given us so much get acknowledgement and also benefit from the creation. So that's it. We're very, very, very blessed. It's nice to be able to be in a place where we can give back.
Well, I thank you for that, just your stance on creative rights, and also you gave me Mike Allred's Madman, and like that's one of my favorite comic books of all time. So
no, it's good. That's good. Yeah, it was. If I didn't publish it, somebody would have, because we had so many guys that were just fantastic. And Mike, just one of my favorite. His whole family was just awesome. He's just a great guy.
Oh yeah. So with the turtle stuff, were you 21 or something that started taking off? That starts happening quick. Like, what was that ride like?
Well, it was it came in two phases. One, I was very young, and Pete's a bit older than I am, but he still had the same aspirations. Hopefully none of you grow up. I never wanted to grow up. I still don't want to be grown up. And so our dreams of becoming a storyteller, become a specific comic book storyteller, like our heroes, Jack Kirby in particular. When we had the success with the first couple issues of the Turtles, and we were able to not work 2 or 3 other jobs so we could draw comics on the side, we were actually able to draw comics full time. And that's really, certainly to Pete and I, where the dream came true. We were getting up every day and drawing comic books. And we were quite positive that nothing could be any better than that. And it still isn't. That's right. I'm 60 years old this year, next month. And I get up every day and I draw comic books, and it's all your fault. Thank you. No, so I still get to do that. And so when people approach us, we're like, hey, we think this could be more cartoons and the other things that we just didn't really see it, to be honest. And much like I spoke on further, the people that inspired us didn't get to participate in the control of the characters. We already had the dream come true that we would comic book self-publishers and artists and supporting ourselves with this. So anybody that approached us to do a deal, we were like, we want full control, final say. We want, you can't do anything with our characters without us agreeing to it, approving it, being part of it. And the first couple of people that approached us just laughed and said, well, you never get those rights, and say, well, fine.
Yeah.
Then we don't want to do a deal with you. We don't need it that much. We're already living a dream. We're lucky enough that the person that ended up representing us out there in the evil world of, can be a sea of sharks of licensing people and toy people and things like that, which will steal all your rights if they can. So we had our protections, and so when it started happening, we never, much like the first issue, we only did the first issue, well, we did the first issue as a self-contained story because we never thought there'd be a second issue. And so that's why that first issue is beginning, middle, and end. And so when we started working on the toys, we were like, who's going to, it worked as a comic book, come on, it's a comic book. How's it going to work on a level? So we really didn't have a lot of faith in it, but we wanted it to be the best it could be under the way we wanted to see our characters represented. So the first cartoon episodes, it was only a 5-part episode. That was, they were just, the toy company put up money and another investor put up money to do a 5-part episode just to see if it would work as a cartoon. And if it worked as a cartoon, then the toy company would go ahead and pull the trigger on doing toys and that kind of thing. So the 5-part episode aired between Christmas 87, the year end 1987. So that Christmas holiday break between late 87, that first 5-part aired, and you guys watched it, and it was had big ratings, and it was a big hit. So then they agreed to do another 8 episodes in early spring, which gives you typical TV series run like 13 episodes. And then that's when the toy company said, well, we're going to take a chance. We think it'd be enough to do toys. And so they pulled the trigger on the toys, because to create a toy line, you have to do these master molds, and it's a big, expensive process. And they don't want to do it unless they think it's going to sell. So the toys came out in 1988. And 2 things, just funny moments you guys get a kick out of. I remember telling my parents, Turtles are going to be a cartoon show, and they were like, what are you smoking? So they were just like, oh, sure. But they were still very supportive, but it was just like, they just couldn't believe it would go from something that we did as a self-published comic book to that. But when it showed up in the TV guide, finally, it's like, I said, see, it's in the TV guide. It's going to be on TV. And my mom was like, well, all right, let's see. And then the other part is, so that was great. And then the other part was when the toys came out, the big toy store chain at that time was KB Toys. And so when the toys came out, Peter and I live in Massachusetts, and we drove down to Springfield, which is the closest KB toy store. And we wanted to see for ourselves that the toys are actually on the toy shelf. And so we're walking through the toy store, and as we got to the action figure section, this mom was dragging this young boy out of the action figure aisle, saying, "No, I'm not buying you one of those stupid Ninja Turtles." And so we were like, "What? What have we done?" But those are 2 mind-blowing moments. And then back to the question, it was sort of once that started happening, it was like we were working. We worked 80, 90 hours a week on all aspects of still doing the comic, working on the toys, working on the new cartoon shows, working on, then evolved quickly into the movie. So we were running this business, and grateful to be doing so. Again, like our forefathers, our people before didn't have that opportunity. So it was sort of like it was happening to somebody else outside of us.
Yeah.
And so then you'd be, take the train into New York City for a meeting, and then see a billboard with the Turtles on it, and it just blew your mind, because you're like, holy heck, it's like it's wild, and it just kept growing from there. So it was pretty it's quite an adventure, and it just kept going. Your fault. Thank you again.
Personally, I'm really curious who did all the duo shade stuff in those early issues.
Yeah. That was actually Pete's idea, and it was such a brilliant idea. And there's without getting too technical, a lot of newspaper illustrators and like guys that worked on Mad Magazine, a lot of black and white publishers. There's this paper, it's called Duo Shade, and you treat it like you would any paper as an artist. So you can pencil on it, you can ink on it, but printed in the paper is a particular pattern, and in our case, it was a crosshatch pattern. And you'd use one of these little chemicals with a brush that would develop the pattern of lines going in one direction, and then you use another chemical that would develop lines going in both directions. So you would get, out of a black and white comic, you'd have black, white, and then 2 tones of gray. When you photocopied it, you staged it for printing it, it's this gray tone, so it gave it a whole other aspect. So it just wasn't a black and white comic, it had this sort of really moody, noir sort of old black and white TV movie sort of feel to it. And, and we just loved it. We used it for all the early comics. I still have, actually, I'm quite positive I am the last guy on Earth with actual duo shade paper and chemicals to develop it in my flat files at home.
Yeah.
I still use it from time to time.
Really? I heard those chemicals are super gnarly and like give you all kinds of mutations and stuff like that.
Yeah, I used to be 4 foot tall. And, no, it's funny because it's like, markers are stinky in those, but it's like, yeah, you just don't drink the chemicals.
Yeah, right. Let's see what happens.
But that was fun, and that was, to me, that's always my favorite. And a lot of you guys were bringing up the original comics, and it always makes my heart happy. You see those oversized, actually even the printing size we did back then. That was an accident. We went to this printer. We really, again, it was the first time we didn't really know what we were doing, so we brought in a comic book and said we want to do a comic book of this size and some of our pages and stuff. And this guy at the print shop normally it was like a advertising leave behind. You used to see at a convenience store, free flyer, like Auto Hunter or one of those things. It was this oversized thing. And so we gave him all the stuff, and then we went to pick up the books from the printer, and it was these large oversized books, and we were like, oh no, that's the wrong size. And he's like, too late now. So we kept the first 4 issues, and Raphael we kept at that oversized size, and it was the more successful it became, the more complaints that we were getting from comic stores and fans. That not only a lot of comic stores were saying, well, we have racks in our comic store that fit comic books, and yours is like a magazine. It's too big. Can you make them smaller, like normal people?
Yeah.
And so around the time that we had enough sales, which was issue 5, we started we added a color cover and started making comics on it.
Yeah, I run one of our shops here, the store manager of the D Comics Games, and I have found that most people won't buy anything magazine size. Yeah. So it's like, well, I'm like, come on, we sell magazine boxes, put it in your own little spot. But I totally understand.
Yeah, no, it's funny because, not to jump ahead, but that's one of the things that so I'm sure we'll touch on Last Ronin in a bit, but that's one of the reasons I wanted to do, for that exact memory, was when we were staging and getting ready to do Last Ronin, is I wanted it larger in page count, because Peter and I would do the early issues that were normally like 35 to 40 pages of story, and then do it oversized and all that stuff. So,
I wanted to get into Last Ronin, and first of all, just ask about how that project came about. Mm-hmm. And so now it's nice to know that you intentionally did it that size. We're going to have to create a whole new bag and board system for that book.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it went right back to those early days where a lot of people were like, why did you do it that size? Nothing fits. It doesn't fit in bags. And until finally a bunch of fans said, well, if you buy Golden Age bags and you take a magazine size board and trim it down, it'll work for you.
That's how we do it.
Oh. That's how you do it. But then there's a whole other step, and they're like, just do a comic size. It's like, no, that was the idea. Is we wanted it oversized, we wanted it big, we wanted it to be something a little bit different. But the idea, the genesis of the idea actually happened back in 1987. Peter and I were just finishing issues 1 through 11. We just finished issue 11, and which went up to 15 if you include the one shots on each of the individual turtles. So we just finished this large story arc of turtles, and it wrapped up a number of things and left the door open. We were going to say, okay, where do we go from here? And so we had this conversation. We said, let's look 30 years down the road and see where they would be in 30 years. Let's call it the final turtle story, which would have been set in 2017. And then we'll use that as our lighthouse to navigate towards. And then that was exactly 87 was when we started working on the toys and the cartoon show. And so that project got shelved, and then got shelved again. And then suddenly, 15 years had passed, and really we just never got back to it. And then a lot of things changed. I sold my rights, and then Pete sold to Viacom, and then I started going back to work on the turtles. It was like all these different things. So Tom Waltz, who is the head writer and genius at IDW, I worked with them, incredible team of artists, and Tom mainly as a writer. And we're heading towards the end of 100 issues, and we were like, I can't believe first one. And again, your fault. Know that we got to do 100 issues in the storyline. So we really had this epic story that we were wrapping up. And about a year prior to finishing them, 2019 was December 2019 would have been issue 100. We were having this conversation like, well, where do we go with the story from here? And it reminded me of what Peter and I talked about in '87. And I pulled out this 20-page outline that we'd written back then. And I said, well, I pulled this out a couple of times. I had this idea of adapting this, just updating it and adapting it. And so that's what we did. So while Tom was finishing most of the heavy lifting on the last, including the introduction of Jenica that we came up with and stuff, I did a complete rewrite, adapting everything, kept it as true to what Pete and I originally created. And so and it was literally December 1st, 2019, because Nickelodeon wasn't sure if they wanted to do it or approve it. And when they finally read all the details, they said, yeah, let's do it. And so they gave us a thumbs up in December of 2019 to go ahead with the series. So then that was it. It was just finding the team and beginning the process of starting down that path with Last Ronin.
Yeah.
It's been a journey, boy. About 3 years. I just finished issue 5 about a month ago. It's up at press if anybody has been following it. The 5th issue of the series will be out next Wednesday, and I hope you like it. It's very deep, very personal. It's very it pays respect to everything that Pete and I created, and it really is set in. The Turtles have always had kind of a multiverse, like a lot of our favorite characters. And we've had the original black and white comics, and then the cartoon Turtles, and the movie Turtles, which is kind of in between the black and white and the animated series. But then there's been different iterations of the Turtles over the years. Some really good, some not quite as good. But not mentioning Michael Bay, so don't. But in particular, like the 2012 animated series that Cyril Neely and those guys, that was one of my favorites. So with Last Ronin, we wanted it to be as close and firmly based in the Mirage Studios universe that we grew up with, and the older fans grew up with. So.
It's got that feeling. And sometimes I'm sitting there like, why are y'all trying to make me cry reading the Turtles comic? Come on.
Well, it was no, thank you. No, it was to tell a good story. It has to go there. You have to get those emotional beats, and they're not as easy to write as you think, and it really has to. That's the one thing I liked about Pete and I worked together, and I even would have this conversation with Tom Waltz throughout the process. I said this reminded me so much of like how Peter and I worked in the original series, is that it had to be story first, and it would kind of evolve organically in that, it would, Pete and I, or Tom and I we'd lay out what we wanted to do over the next couple issues. And then kind of like if you're directing a movie, it's like, I would do the layouts. I would do the page to page breakdown, which is the staging, the action sequences, the acting, sort of staging the bits, how it would flow. And while you're doing that, the story evolves. You realize story beats and story moments that that weren't even in your outline. You're not working from a finished script, so the story grows organically, and you have to feel it. And you have to, if it's emotional to me, then hopefully that'll translate to the fans. And to me, that's any good writer, any good director, or any person will tell you that you have to write for yourself first, and hopefully that'll translate, because that's the one you got to be true to. And so that was the approach to it. And so there's some moments in there. Right?
Yeah. Oh, there are. And if you haven't read The Last Ronin, I highly encourage you to check it out. Like you said, the final issue's finally coming out. And is the collection going to be oversized like that?
Yes, I believe it is. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is. And there has been discussions of kind of like because it was very much like I've sort of been chasing Frank Miller for most of my career. Inspired by Frank Miller. This was kind of my homage to Dark Knight, what he did with Batman. And Dark Knight created another universe in the Batman multiverse to tell stories in. And so we didn't, when we started, that's for sure. It was not it was a surprise to us as well. That it was received as well as it was, and sold as well as it was. And so Tom and I started thinking about other stories that we could do in the Last Ronin universe, and see if we can come up with some ideas.
Oh, that's really good.
So we'll see.
That's awesome. And the other thing, I have one more thing before we can open up here.
Sure.
If you want, but everybody likes to talk about the tank that you had. You had an actual military tank.
Which I still have.
But I want to know, what was it like to cruise around in Batmobile?
Man, it's funny. Every time I think of the Batmobile, and actually, if you didn't know, 2 points real quick is there was a comic book I liked when I was a kid called The Haunted Tank, and it was a Stewart light tank that was inspired by it was a descendant of Jeb Stewart, a general, and he had this tank was a M15A Stewart light tank, and I met on one of the movie sets I met a producer that supplied military vehicles for lots of different movies. And I joked, I said, "Hey, I always wanted to buy a tank. You got any tanks?" And he goes, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Really?" And so I said, "How much would I said, "This particular tank." And he actually had this, it was an M15A Stewart light tank. And he was actually used in a movie called Red Dawn. It was done back in the day, Patrick Swayze. Go Warriors! And so I said, "How much?" And it was $35,000 to buy a freaking tank.
That didn't seem like much.
No, and I'm like, really? An expensive car for that much.
Yes.
And so he said, "Yeah, deliver it." And I'm like, so I lived in Massachusetts at the time. I had a bit of acreage, and it ran on 2 twin Cadillac engines, and you would drive it like you would a bulldozer. You accelerate and you just brake a tread to turn this way and that. And so the neighbors were kind of traumatized for a bit.
Yeah.
When I first, he's got a tank. But years later, I sold it to a museum, so it's on display there. But I also I used some of the turtle money that I didn't spend on developing Tundra as a publishing company. I built a museum called Words and Pictures, which is dedicated to the preservation and presentation of comic books as real art, because this goes back also to, I remember telling people what I wanted to do for a living, much like my parents, like, "Oh, we're going to have one of those kids. We're going to move out of the basement." Or my dad would be like, you never make a living. You can't support a family drawing comics. You need to have a real trade and a real job. And, that's the way they were raised, and that's the way, that's what he believed in. And so a lot of people would look at comic book art, cartooning, as not a real art form. And my opinion, very young, was like, I don't care if it's a velvet Elvis painting or somebody that throws and spatters paint on the wall. If you think it's art and you appreciate it as an art form, it's an art form. And to me, comics is an art form. And so I founded this museum called Words and Pictures, and my collection, and I'd have other comic book artists, and I would present the art in a real museum setting. And so one of the things that to continue to bring audiences in, building into the entertainment community, Batman as a movie was huge at that time. And I found a guy that had the Michael Keaton from the first Tim Burton Michael Keaton Batmobile for sale, and so I bought it to put it at the museum. It was 22 and a half feet long. It was built on a Chevy 73 Chevy Impala frame, which is just a massive beast. But it only had a 5-gallon gas tank, so you couldn't drive it very far. And it was just really, it was made to be in a movie, so it was, could only drive short distances and this and that. So you couldn't take it out on the freeway, really. It wasn't built for that. But I would always have this idea, usually after I've had a beer or two too many, I get this idea where, like, I want to go down, put on my Batman suit, go down to the store and get some milk. Or get more beer. So just, that would be the thing, the turtle guy gets arrested.
Yeah.
Dressed as Batman, drunk driving.
People would be bringing that newspaper as a heavy sign.
That would be awesome. So I had that for a number of years, and it was what a treat. And then that also I sold to a museum so that other people could enjoy it as well. So.
I love the idea of the Words and Pictures Museum. I would love to see something like that come back. And did you have like every page of Electra Assassin?
Yeah, I bought right from. So we worked with a lot of artists. We had when Marvel Knights first came out, Kevin Smith and Joe Quesada, and everybody came up and we did a big thing. And we did a couple big shows on Electra. I had a lot of that art. And, yeah, that was. Really, it was done as to really celebrate comics as an art form, and because it is, a lot of people would like, I remember, and it's funny. One of the things that also stuck out in my mind when I was younger, in the early days of the Turtles, that we were at a comic convention and Pete and I were signing and this mom had brought her son to get some stuff signed, and Peter and I were signing it, and she's just sort of like, "What did you do on that?" And I said, "Well, we wrote it and we drew it." She goes, "You drew what?" And he said, "Well, we drew the pictures. We drew everything. We drew all the comics." And it took her a few minutes, and she said, "So you literally drew that, and then they printed it?" And he said, "Yeah." And she said, "I thought it was just like stamped out in a factory somewhere, like you just made like a toy or something." She didn't make the connection that actually a real artist and a real person had to do that. So so that was part of one of those things that I just wanted people to see the amount of work and detail and stuff that, because comics are hard, and it's like, Last Ronin, for example, that was 3 years of work. And that was every set, every action, every layout, everything had to be designed, done, and illustrated, and bit by bit, brick by brick. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that.
Oh, my pleasure.
I appreciate that. All right, we can open up for a few questions now. We got a little bit of time. Then we still got to figure out how to get these.
I know. So I'll come up with a couple of trivia. How much time do you got?
10-ish minutes.
10-ish minutes. I'll do a little.
All right.
Maybe I can come up with trivia question or something.
I got at least one I can figure out. So.
There's a microphone here. You can just talk loud, or you can use a microphone.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Oh, they weren't. They didn't like the. They didn't think the villains were strong enough in that one. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
Why did you that plan or actually stop middle other characters? Why did you do that?
No, that's a really good question, and what he's asking is like the villains, and I actually thinking back, I agree to a certain extent, is that we felt that villains could have been stronger in the third turtle movie, which we did this time travel story, and was wondering why we didn't use more like more Krang and those kind of things. Well, the experience we had with Secret of the Ooze, we originally were approaching it. We wanted to do Bebop and Rocksteady as the main bad guys instead of Toko and Razor, but then also we were continuing to grow and build the Turtles universe of characters and bad guy characters. And so we created 2 new ones, and we thought that would be appealing to fans, like come see the new bad guys. And most people were like, why don't you just do Bebop and Rocksteady? At that time too, we didn't have the special effects and the opportunities to do the things that we're able to do now. And so, much like if you remember The Secret of the Ooze, if you go back and watch it, it was 2 guys in rubber suits, and it's hard to pull off. It was hard enough to pull the Turtles off in the first place, and so you want them to be believable and bad enough. And so when we approached the idea of doing a third movie, we said, well, the heritage of the Turtles, the Asian heritage, which is an important part of the Turtles universe and the Turtles history, right back from the very first issue, we wanted to embrace that and sort of tell a story within that context. And so we thought this time travel story would be really unique, where they go back in time and sort of meet some of their people that create the teachings and things that they do. So, but I like my favorite Turtle movie of all time will always be the first one. The second and third one are about the same to me. I like them both equally. A lot of fans really like the Secret of the Ooze more.
I love Secret of the Ooze. And in fact, I always thought you should have brought Vanilla Ice in as the villain in part 3.
It's not too late. We can no, I just saw him. He's doing a local commercial here for some reason.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Vanilla Ice.
Yeah, because I saw him. He did the macaroni and cheese commercial. Did you see that?
No, I haven't seen that.
There's a really great macaroni and cheese commercial where he's like a stock boy in a grocery store, and he's putting out. They had Turtles mac and cheese, and so the mom's like, "Go Ninja, go Ninja, go!" And he was a stock boy, but I saw him.
I did get to see him in concert several years ago.
Yeah, I guess.
And he did Ninja Rap, and I was like,
yeah, he's still
doing it. Still doing it. We got anything else? Yes, sir. Okay.
Going back to the last Ronin story, you talked about going back to the original Mirage Run, but then you talked about coming up with that story at issue 11. Did you say?
Yep.
So, even though the City at War is kind of canon, some of the stuff doesn't translate necessarily, you can watch. So would you say that Last Roman is more tied directly to the first 11 issues as far as if you wanted to look at it as a whole story, or, I don't know what you're thinking going into the story?
Well, yes, it's probably more tied to the original, the first 11, to an extent, and it's more almost specifically to the intent of what we wrote in the very first issue, in the foundation and the basis for almost every single version of the Turtles since then has always been that they were, there was a tragedy within the Turtles family, the Turtles universe. Depending on which version, parents were killed, or that kind of thing, and then the Turtles were trained to seek vengeance for that action, to sort of set things right, and a lot of the components of the basis for that story, which again is used in because Casey, April, Shredder characters have been used in almost every single version. Every entertainment version, and even a lot of comic lines since the beginning. So sort of that basis is, this is after all has passed in this story arc, that it's the resolution of what was set up in issue 1 to be resolved in the Last Roman. That was the intent that I was shooting for with that. Encompasses it's a lot of, because again, it's like. We all saw the new Spider-Man movie, which was fantastic, but it was great. That's sort of the multiverse thing, and that's even how Tom and I would approach, because Tom was a really big fan of the 2000 series, like Fast Forward and that sort of edgier Fox Kids series that was done. But it was great things that were about the Turtles that we could pull from multiple Turtle universes for bringing characters. And
Stokes, did you have one?
I think he had one here.
Yeah.
Have you ever met the martial artists in the Teenage Mutant in the movie? Have you ever met them?
Oh yes, yeah. We used to go.
Ernie Reyes Jr.
Ernie Reyes is one of the coolest guys on the planet. He's great. Ernie's. I met Ernie. If you didn't know, you might already know, but a lot of people forget that, or didn't know, realize that Ernie Reyes wore the Donatello costume, martial arts costume, in the first movie, and he was a great. He'd already done. Sidekick, and he had been on TV. He had his TV series earlier. But then when we were developing the second one, we said, well, let's, we love Ernie. Let's bring him out as a character, because kid can act, and he's an amazing martial artist. So, but we used to go on set for all the movies, and it was one of those things that it was great to meet some of these guys, because a lot of them were they were the no joke, real deal guys. Remember meeting you had. Like in the first movie, you had 2 sets of actors. You had one set that would wear turtle costumes that would do the acting, and where the shell was perfect, so it would hold all of the electronics to make the animatronics work in the shell, and they would do the acting bits. But then they had another set of guys, which was these bona fide, guys that would work Jackie Chan and the police story movies and that kind of stuff, that would wear these stunt ones and do all those spin kicks and all those martial arts moves wearing 80-pound suits. And they were fantastic. But those guys, they didn't speak any English at all. Even there's a guy in Tatsu, the guy, ninja attack. That's not a word of English. And it's like, he would just go, hey, what's up, dude? But yeah, so he would do everything phonetically. He'd have somebody that would coach him to say. That's why his he has a few lines. But he was, holy shit, he's a really talented, he's a serious martial artist.
Awesome.
But yeah, there's got to be.
Well, unfortunately, we are pretty much out of time, but we got to do this giveaway here, so we need to do a couple trivia questions. We have these; they're given to us by what is that?
It's
Slab Stands, where they make stands for your slabbed comics, TGC books. These are turtle-themed ones that Kevin is signing for us right now. So I got a question here. Then just hold up your hand if you know the answer. This is chaotic. Jeremy just brought these to me. He was like, figure out a way to pass these, to give these away. What comic book did April O'Neil first appear in? I saw him first.
Oh, number 2.
There you go.
Trick question.
I say we did it. Just throw them out, you guys.
You want to throw the last one? Just like jump it out there?
No, it's,
Now you can come up with something for that.
man.
You said I'll take a concussion for free.
This is, I don't know, I'm trying to come up with something like a little more challenging, because you guys are
I was trying, man.
smart.
They are.
I know the turtles.
I know.
I say like, who they named.
Which turtle's that one?
That's Steve.
Okay.
Cousin Steve. He never paid attention. No, people will do that. They go, "What's your favorite turtle?" And I'll go, Doninato, Leotello.
We do a little cold roll. Raise your hand if it's Raphael. Okay. Raise your hand if it's Mikey. It's mine. Donnie? Oh, wow.
Donna's really popular.
Leo? Oh, okay. Donnie seems to be the most popular and surprising. Everyone I know is Raph.
This is kind of, you guys probably know this. It's too easy. You guys are so. And I was gonna say like.
It's easy when you try it. Ask you the first appearance of April O'Neil.
What's the turtle's favorite food? Not kidding.
Trick question. It's spam. You don't know that.
Spam it is. We can do that. So there's an actor that voiced the turtles in the first season and then in one of the most recent seasons. Do you know who his name was?
So I'd be back there. This hand.
Sorry, that was so lame. I'm sorry. What? No. Oh wait, yes it is.
No, it's Steve.
Steve. And I'm sorry. So we'll do that. And if you had a chance to meet Rob, please go meet him. He's just the coolest guy on the planet. He's animating. He's done everything. And we were lucky enough to have him do Raphael in the first version of the cartoon, Donatello.
I remember watching that show from, it's like 10 years ago, right? And being like, that sounds like Raphael, but it's Donatello. Something's not right. My child inside is like, this does not compute.
And then they got me to the space about the voices of the crossover.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. I remember that was clever. No, that was you guys know who wrote the theme song for the original Turtles? Yeah. But no, the guy actually wrote it was Chuck Lorre. Yeah, you knew that. Okay.
From like Cheers and all that stuff?
No, Big Bang Theory, 2.5 Men.
Yeah, did he do Cheers?
Oh, did he?
I don't know. He's like been television for so long. I thought maybe I'm thinking of somebody else. Yeah, lots of that stuff. All right, well, that's pretty much all the time we have. We thank you so much. Kevin Eastman, thank you so much for being here.
Well, I just want to say thanks again, and thanks for standing in line. And we're doing some photo ops, and we're going to be signing from 4 to 6 today, and then we'll be 2 signings and more fun tomorrow. So see you at photos. I'll see you back at the booth at 4. Sound good? Oh, and then that was awesome. Thank you. Nice. You're welcome. Thank you. Sure.
Yeah, 35,
Well,
4, and
these days I'm looking at
Yes.
get everybody, and then just put your name and phone number on there, your name, but that way you well, I think we're definitely there, like,
social media.
Sounds good.
you're welcome.
But otherwise,
Yeah,
work at it.
it's a party. They ended up telling me, like, don't worry.
Not like
That is funny, yeah. It's like
That was awesome. Yeah, fine.
they gave up. Oh, I had end of line people like what you guys are doing. I literally had them like staff or volunteer like holding the sign, and then when I look back like half an hour later, not only is there 20 more people in line, but the sign is almost done, and they're gone. I'm like, what just happened? Oh, I was telling her about when we had someone that was doing the line, and they had to end the line. They're gone.
Oh, they just left.
Yeah, it was a while ago.
Well, they
Yeah, great question. By the way, did you do the break?
I said it to him when I walked up. Yeah, the Deep Comics and Games. Yeah, it's the Deep Comics and Games. We're right off the parkway. We're pretty good. Yeah, comics, cards, toys, games, all that stuff. We have 80 areas up there. We're pretty large, so we have lots of cool stuff. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the Deep. Yeah. Uh-huh. Oh, I know those dudes around. What was that dude's name that was in? He played John the Baptist in Eastman.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't even remember his name. But I know who we're talking about.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, when I first saw Lois on the color, that's a great girl.
No, I remember she was on comics in the 70s.
Oh, right. Just wait it for me.
I will.
Okay.
Well, upstairs, yeah.